Welcome and thanks for joining us again. I'm Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's, and I want to thank you for tuning in to join us as we speak today with Mairéad Farrell, Galway TD. She represents Galway West and is Sinn Féin's party spokesman on expenditures and reform. Before being elected to the Dáil, she was actually on the Galway City Council, and you might recognize her name from her famous aunt. But without further ado, I just want to say hello and welcome. You're in Dublin though right now, Mairéad, correct?
I am indeed, Jay. I'm in Leinster House at the moment, so that's where the Dáil sits. So I'm here today to do a bit of work, but thanks so much for inviting me on. I'm excited for this conversation. I'm delighted to get to know you a bit better as well during this conversation. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I start every one of these off in kind of the same way. Like, tell us how you got involved. What brought you into Sinn Féin activism? Like, what's kind of your foundation story?
Okay, it's interesting. I think that it's something that I hadn't really thought about until I got elected in 2014 for the first time, and something that comes up a good bit. But I think it's interesting. It's something you don't really think about until you're actually asked it. So I suppose for me, I've always been very interested in history. So when I was 14 in my English class, we were doing how to write speeches and how to write inspirational speeches and all that. And one speech that we read in our English book was the speech or the oration by Pádraig Pearse at O'Donovan Ross's funeral. And it was just sparked a huge interest in me in Irish history, in republicanism. And from that, I suppose, I went on then and I went home that day, actually. I went home. I remember going home that day to my parents and saying, I read this speech and it's fantastic and all this. And my dad said, oh, well, I have the book written by O'Donovan Ross about his time in English jail. So it was kind of like a diary kind of thing. So I immediately got that and I read that. And then that brought me on to Tom Clark, who's one of the signatories of the 1916 proclamation. And then I read about his wife. And then I read about Terence McSweeney. So every book kind of then gave me another idea of somebody else to read about. And I just always found it so interesting. And I said at that point, I was definitely going to study history. So I think that really sparked it. It was my interest in Republican history, I think, really. And then I suppose from that then, I joined Sinn Féin when I was 18. So as soon as I went to college, because I wanted to join way before that, but my mother says, no, you have to focus on your school and all that, schooling and doing your leaving cert and getting into university and all that. So I did that, and then as soon as I could, I joined Sinn Féin. So I think that's kind of, I suppose, how I ended up getting involved in Sinn Féin, and I'm obviously delighted I did.
Wow. Now, your family, your aunt in particular, was a Republican leader. She was one of the Gibraltar Three that was murdered by British SAS. Can you speak for just a moment or two about her legacy and kind of how you think about that in your daily work and whatnot?
Yeah, of course. I think, it's something, again, that I'm asked actually quite a lot, and I never really know how to answer it because people always say, oh, was she a big inspiration for you and all that? But for me, I very much see her as family. I see her as my aunt. She was my only aunt. My mother has two brothers and my dad only had the one sister and then brothers. So I suppose it just had obviously a lasting impact on our family. Growing up, me and my sister were always very aware that she had spent a considerable amount of time in prison. So she spent 10 years in prison, and we were also aware that she had been murdered. And we knew that, I kind of remember from growing up, even the court case, my own family and Dan McCann's family and Sean Savage's family brought a case to the European Court of Human Rights. I actually remember that happening because I remember my father bringing back presents and that kind of thing, and from being away. So that's, I suppose, I just very much see it in her in a family light. But I suppose then when I had joined Sinn Féin, I was joined just locally involved in Galway, and then I went to a few national events, and one event in particular was the 90th anniversary of the first Dáil, and that we had that in the Mansion House. And I remember going along to it and there being a massive picture of my aunt, and I thought it was the strangest thing ever. I found it bizarre because I had no idea that, I suppose, in Republican circles that people would have known of, or that just was something growing up in Galway I had no idea about. But yeah, I actually, behind me there, just by chance, I do have a picture of her in my Dáil office. And one thing that I was given there a few years ago, she ran in the general election in Cork, and she had, there's like a slip that you sign, or that somebody signs on your behalf to say that you're now officially a candidate. And somebody gave me that little piece of paper, and I have my own one for my general election campaign. So I'm going to frame it. I'm going to put it up in here as well. I think that's kind of something nice to do, and also quite interesting. But in that sense, for me, I very much see her in a family light rather than, obviously in a political sense, but very much family rather than anything else. What I do think, though, even looking back now, I suppose, when we're looking at what probably got me involved politically in that, I think that Bobby Story, who sadly passed away not that long ago, probably had a huge impact. Looking back now, I realize he had a massive impact on me getting involved in Sinn Féin and my interest in republicanism. And one story that I've told a few people since is how we used to visit him as a child when he was in prison. And I remember now, looking back, it probably was a huge shock to my teacher at the time, but I was 7 and I was going into our Monday morning. We had this section where everyone had to say what they did that weekend, or maybe it was the previous week and we might have been off. And I came in proud as punch to say that I finally had news for our little news section, that she would write it up on the blackboard. And I was saying about how I went to see my good friend in prison. And of course, I was growing up in Galway, and that was a totally different, you know, people didn't have an understanding really what was going on in the north in a lot of senses. But I really, you know, I suppose I was very, very close to Bobby, and I really liked him. He was always fantastic with children. So me and my sister loved going visiting him. So I think probably even then, later in life, I would have always asked him advice and that kind of thing. So I think he probably had a massive influence on me in terms of like developing my politics and that.
Wow. Well, let's actually talk your political career a little bit. You finished your master's degree in finance and then went back to Galway and ran for the city council in 2014. Is that correct? You represented your constituents well, but then you actually lost your seat, but immediately flipped around and ran for TD, which is an amazing thing, and you won that one handily. So can you just talk about that, and then what advice would you give maybe to a younger you who's looking to kind of seek that same elected office path?
Yeah, so I was 23 when I was selected to run in the local elections. That was then in the following May in 2014. And I actually think that it's way easier running for election when you're younger, when for the first time, because there's not the same pressure. I mean, nobody expected, you know, even my friend group or anything like that. There's no massive expectations. And I would imagine it can be difficult if you've lived a certain life and then you're putting yourself out there like that. But obviously to be massively encouraged. And so I ran for the first time and I got elected then in 2014. And I, you know, did as much as I could. And it was a bad day for Sinn Féin. We lost an awful lot of seats in May 2019. And it was very tough. I'm not going to lie, it was very, very tough. But I actually had a friend and he rang me. Well, he was in contact with me. He had gotten elected. So he was an independent and he got elected. And he rang me, and he had previously lost elections. And what he said was, you know, the next campaign starts tomorrow. Don't let this stop you. Like, just keep going. You know, you feel very passionate about your politics and all that, and just keep going. So the day after, I think I must have lost on the Saturday, and the day after on the Sunday, like, I was hell for leather going for this next election. Like, I, you know, in 5 years' time, in a lot of ways, like, I didn't expect from lost the local election to then run in the general election and get elected. So I was very much looking at the 5 years time vision, you know. And I think the key thing and the kind of core value that you need to have is that, you know, I fundamentally believe that Sinn Féin's vision, Sinn Féin's politics, our policies will actually help the majority of people, and I really want to see a united Ireland. So, you know, it's more of that. It's your whole vision of what you want to see. And one thing that we always say in our family is, what's the point in life, you know, and that's a kind of age-old question, but we always say it's to try and do anything, and whatever way you're doing, it doesn't necessarily need to be electoral politics. It doesn't even need to be politics. It can be in the school you work in. It can be whatever it is. that you try and better society for those coming next. So that's always kind of been our way of thinking. So I think that's what kind of just, that's what I was focused on. Then I suppose in January, so I lost out in May, and it was very tough, I'm not going to lie, and I think anyone who's lost an election will say that it's a tough time. But I remember somebody said to me, it strengthens your character, and I just thought to myself, I think I've had enough strengthening of character now, like I don't want to see any more of that. But then say come January 2020, so this January, an election was called. It was a 4-week campaign. We had always said, and I'd always said, I'm just going to give everything to it. I want to just do my best. And I didn't even mean get in. I just meant I want to know that I did everything that I can. And then we'll take the next step. If it's the next local elections 4 years later, then that's what's next. So we just put everything that we could. We just threw everything at it. And then it was a good day for Sinn Féin. But I'm also very aware that, things can change. So it's about trying to get, represent your constituents as best you can, and that means on a local and on a national stage. So I suppose having lost, I know how easy it is to lose and how much work needs to be done.
Now, I just want to ask you for just a quick moment, could you explain the Dáil and TD and just kind of what that, I want to make sure that people who are watching really understand what role you're playing right now.
Absolutely. So I think the Dáil, from what I understand, is very much like the Congress that you have. So in a sense, a TD is in, like I'd be a congresswoman, and we have 160 in the Dáil, and we have 37 Sinn Féin TD. So that's a very sizable portion.
And there's like there's like 8 or 9 different political parties there, unlike ours where we have 2 political parties.
Yeah.
Like you guys actually have several. So having 37 is a big number.
It's a big number, yeah. It's a massive number. So, we have a number of parties. So at the moment, our government actually consists of 3 parties. So it's Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and the Green Party. And then there's obviously ourselves. We're the lead opposition. We want to be in government. We wanted to be in government. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are, I suppose, afraid of us being in government, because I think one thing that's really key is that, unfortunately, people in a lot of senses have lost hope that things can actually change. And it's because so many other political parties and politicians promised this kind of change, and they didn't deliver on it. And sure. I think, we have that, vision of hope and of change, and that's what people see in us. And it's very important. So for us now as opposition, we're the lead opposition. That gives us, we're in a great position. We can really challenge the government. But of course, our aim is to be in government, and the sooner the better, because I genuinely think that will better people's lives.
Now, it's a really unique position to be in. It's an incredible position to be in, to be a part of it and to be a TD at this time. What do you think the future holds for Ireland? Where do you see it heading? And then kind of, what role do you think that the Friends of Sinn Féin can actually play in that effort?
Well, I think that politics has really changed in Ireland. So I think in this state, in the 26 counties, 2 things really brought young people far more on board. So there was a reproductive rights referendum, and there was a marriage equality referendum, and both were heavily, young people were heavily involved in it. And for the first time, young people could see that their involvement really actually brought about legislative change and what they felt strongly about. So I think that really changed the dynamic in terms of young people getting more involved and seeing that there was an ability to change. I definitely think without question, in my view, Irish unity is extremely achievable at the moment. It's absolutely doable. Of course, it'll take a lot of work by us all, but I think there's been a lot of changes in the perceptions. I've noticed even in Galway. So Galway's on the west coast of Ireland. Okay, it's in the 26 counties. It's very removed. If for those people who don't want to know anything about what's going on in the north, who don't want to know about an Irish unity referendum, it's very easy if you're living in Galway to just totally ignore what's going on around you, I suppose, in terms of the 6 counties and that. But what I've really noticed now is that people in Galway are coming up to me and saying, you know, we need Irish unity. And there was two key things in my view that changed that. Firstly, it was Brexit. People in Galway didn't think that Brexit was of benefit to the north. They saw that in the 6 counties, people voted against Brexit, but they were being forced into it because of what was happening in Britain. And then another thing was the COVID-19 response. And people felt that Boris Johnson's response to COVID-19 wasn't good. And they saw the impact that that had then on the 6 counties. And then obviously, like, we're one island, so the ability of a virus like that to move and to spread. So that really changed people's attitudes. People who were able to, or just simply ignored it, or weren't aware, maybe weren't that politically interested, weren't interested in history. I think that really changed it. So I really do think that Irish unity is extremely doable now. I think that it's only a matter of time. I think what we need to do as Republicans is we need to, and I mean that in the Irish sense, obviously, the Irish Republican sense, we need to popularize it. We need to make it, it's not just our own, it's for everyone to get involved in. And what I would like to see is that in the next program for government, so obviously when a government is formed here, there's a program for government that the government parties agree on and say that they want to deliver in the term of their government. And what I would like to see is that the next time that that comes together, whenever that may be, so this government can only last 5 years, then they have to call a general election. But obviously things, because it's a coalition government of 3 parties, things can change and a government may fall, which would cause an election. But what I would like to see happen is that when this next program for government is put together, whenever that may be, that the public are crying out for a push for unity referendum be part of that program for government. Like, we need to popularize it to that extent. In terms of yourselves, I mean, I think it's just fantastic that we have friends of Sinn Féin, and I'm delighted to be involved in this today. And I know I have some friends who are also involved with it, the likes of Seamus from Limerick. So I think that having your support, having that international support, having it part of the political agenda in the US, having it part of the political agenda, I just need to turn my light on. Having it part of the political agenda worldwide, and just having that pressure on is extremely important, because the pressure needs to be put on the British government to ensure that a unity referendum happens, as well as on an Irish government as well.
I think that's I think that's fantastic. Now, to wrap up, this is kind of always my last thing. Like, if you had someone that came to you and just said, I want to learn more, what would you recommend to that person that they read? Or if it's a website that they go visit, or an album that they listen, whatever it is, what is your recommendation to the one person who's sitting in Kansas City right now and saying, hey, I want to know where I can go to learn more? What would you recommend?
Well, I think that, there's a lot of different things, and that speech by Pádraig Pearse at O'Donovan Ross's grave was something that inspired me. But I think that one book that I found excellent, and it's an easy read, and it's not too long either, if you want to just get an initial flavor, I suppose, or initial information, is the book by Sheila Dara, John Lennon's Dead. And he was an OC. It's a fantastic book, and it's funny, and it's everything, and it really details it. But she was the OC in Armagh women's jail during the 1980 hunger strike, where 3 women in Armagh jail went on hunger strike. And it's a very, very interesting read. But again, it's not too long, so it's easy written, it's easy to read, because there's nothing worse than you might get the most interesting book, but it's extremely hard to read, and you read 5 pages and you can't remember what happened in the first page. So I think John Lennon's Dead by Sheila Dara is a good place to start.
I love that book. I bought copies of that book for every one of my nieces. I just want them to see that. I think it's a fantastic recommendation. Well, I definitely want to thank you very much for your time. I know you're in the middle of a work, and so we got to cut things a little bit short today, but thank you so much for sharing your story and kind of your vision and what's going on there. Like, that's absolutely amazing. And I really hope that we get to do this again sometime soon so that we can continue this discussion. As for everybody tuning in, thank you again for joining us. The best thing that you can do right now is to share this video with your friends and family members. You know somebody that really would find this interesting, and we kind of need to continue spreading the word. So spread it around Facebook, spread it around social media as much as possible. Become a friend of Sinn Féin. And until next time, thank you very much for tuning in. Slán.